Welcome back to MedTech's Biomed Focus 22 series. As we're spending some time today looking at life sciences assets and resources in Rochester and the Finger Lakes. In our first hour, you heard from Bob Duffy and his team at the Greater Rochester Chamber, along with some local leaders talking about the Rochester and Finger Lakes regions. This hour, I'm pleased to have brought together some academic and industry leaders in the life sciences, and we'll spend a little more time drilling down into some of the particular assets in the region, ways to connect, to find partners, and talk about the life sciences ecosphere in across the Finger Lakes. I'm pleased to be joined today by Ryan Raffelli, the Vice President of Research at Rochester Institute of Technology, Stephen Dewhurst, the Vice President of Research at the University of Rochester, Lou Walser, the Executive Director of the McGovern Center for Venture Development in the Life Sciences, Joe Chaperi, Head of Assay Research and Development at Quidel Ortho, most recently Quidel Ortho, having formerly been Ortho Clinical Diagnostics, and maybe we'll get Joe to talk a little bit about the recent change in that corporate structure. And Mary Richardson, the Executive Vice President and Chief Scientific Officer of Iuvo Bioscience, located in Rush, kind of in the heart of the region. One and all, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate some time from your day. I'm wondering if we could, and Ryan, we'll start with you. I'd like each of you to introduce yourselves and tell us a bit about your institution or organization.
Sure, Wynn, thanks. So as Wynn mentioned, I'm the Vice President of Research at RIT. RIT has actually been around since something like 1829, but for the first century or so, it was more or less the Mechanics Institute and focused on sort of workforce training going back to the Erie Canal. But at this stage of our evolution, we're now in the top 10 largest private technical universities in the country. And we have overseas campuses in Croatia and Dubai and Kosovo and China. And in the, say, the life sciences, this is a somewhat of a new occurrence for RIT in terms of a lot of research and development. Although we've had, healthcare related programs for a long time, they were kind of spread around campus in the various colleges. But about 10 years ago, we launched our College of Health Science and Technology. And although at that time we did a fair amount of medical related research, it was usually with our partners at University of Rochester and places like that. But over the last decade or so, our research portfolio has grown dramatically, sort of in the life sciences. Today, we have, say, 33 NIH research awards that are active, and 23 of those are as the lead institution. So that's been quite the change for us. In fact, we just won a planning grant for a National Science and Technology Center associated with technology-enabled behavioral health. And that's a big new trend for us, is sort of working on digital tools for things like mental health and other sorts of things. I know a couple of the presenters later on, VPG and Kasana, those were based on some of the technology coming out of RIT. And that's the trend that we've seen. I don't think RIT has moved as much as some of the, say, the NIH or some of the people who fund healthcare research have moved more towards the kinds of things that we do. And so it's definitely a growing part of our portfolio. We recently were invited to submit a full proposal on an NSF Engines program, where we teamed with U of R and St. John Fisher to work on these digital tools for mental health therapy. So a lot going on in some of these new technology spaces for us in the life sciences.
Terrific. Let's turn to your crosstown neighbor. Stephen Dewhurst, tell us a bit about University of Rochester and its research portfolio.
Sure. So maybe just in terms of numbers, very roughly, we have about 409 million in research expenditures as of fiscal 21. And our research group employs about 3,000 people, give or take, a little bit more, which would make it one of the 10 largest businesses in Rochester if it was a standalone entity. And that's as a component of the overall medical center and university at U of R, which is the 5th or 6th largest business or largest private employer in New York State, with something around 32,000 employees and a total annual budget of around $5 billion, give or take. So some of the things that are strong assets for us on the research side are the Laboratory for Laser Energetics, which is funded by the Department of Energy and the National Nuclear Security Administration. So LLE has a direct budget of about $84 million currently, annually. And it is the largest laser facility at any academic institution in the country, or actually, I think in the world. So that creates some very unique opportunities for us to do work that really, for example, looks at materials under extreme conditions. So you can mimic the heart of the sun using high pressure and high temperature. And you can mimic the heart of large planets as well to really understand planetary science as well as material science. We have very strong programs in optics, developing and have a pending application for a NIH National Cancer Institute. That is we're hoping that's going to be funded in the current year. I'm very optimistic about that. And that's been aligned to a large growth in clinical trials for cancer across the region, coming to Wilmot Cancer Institute. We have a lot of strength in neuroscience. The Mount Hope Family Center for us is part of a engagement with the community that includes our new Office of Health Equity Research. As Ryan said, one of the collaborative areas for us is around our health lab. So that really takes innovative decision-making support for docs and integrates that with clinical care, but it creates these opportunities, for example, to provide care throughout the region for folks, for example, who may have mental health care needs. And as I think we're all very well aware, that the ability to access care in rural areas is really limited, and having that sort of telemedicine, that outreach is really critical. So that partnership in the proposal that Ryan was speaking to is really very important, both to us and to RIT. And I would say maybe the last note to end on is that I think our two institutions, as the two largest of the academic institutions locally, are really very interested in doing more things jointly and together and sort of leveraging our complementary strengths.
Terrific, thank you. And while we're on the academic theme, Lou Walser, let me turn to you and Cornell. And I'm wondering particularly if you could talk about the McGovern Center for Venture Development in the Life Sciences and how that fits in to the larger academic environment at Cornell.
Well, thanks, Ben. Hi, I'm Lou Walser from Cornell. And I'll put the center in its appropriate context, and that is first at the top level. Cornell is a major player in research and a major player in life science research. Number 12 nationally in terms of overall research expenditures. In 2021, 1.2 billion in research spending in 2021, rated number 1 in research expenditures in 2021. So of that 1.22 billion research expenditure portfolio, about 2/3 of that is life sciences. And within the life science portfolio is biomedical, agricultural, and everything in between, ranging materials. It's a pretty diverse research portfolio. The mission of the McGovern Center within this context is to look at Cornell's life science technology output, assess which aspects of that output is most likely to succeed from a commercial perspective, work with the faculty, sometimes students, sometimes outside management teams, in order to put together a venture. And to put that in context, over the last decade, we've done about 450 such team interventions, of which roughly 1/4 have turned into new ventures. And within those new ventures that we've helped to midwife, we're highly selective. Less than 1/4 of those have actually been admitted into our residential incubator facility, where they get abused regularly and flogged to perform. As an incubator, the McGovern Center and Cornell's approach to this task is somewhat unique in the state and the nation. Ours is an incubator facility in which you do not necessarily have to pay for rent. Whether you pay rent or not is almost incidental, but you must perform. And those technology teams that are unwilling or unable to meet the requirements of a mutually agreed upon incubation plan designed to make them investable at a larger scale, mind you, investable from a private equity perspective rather than a grant perspective, because one is a higher bar than the other. If they're unable to secure funding, unable to implement their plan, we will throw them out. And so it's a painful process, but it does cull the herd effectively. And the net result is, even including the losers over the last 10 years, center clients have received about $430 million in equity investment, private equity investment, both during and after incubation. If we just look at their incubation period, it's about $73 million for incubated clients on average who are in our house somewhere between 2 to 3 years. It works out to about $68,000 in equity investment per month of residence. They're also equally productive in terms of federal SBIR, STTR funding. But as I said earlier, almost everybody who is a faculty member or a postdoc at the institutions around this virtual table knows how to get grants. So we regard that as low-hanging fruit and don't actually count it towards our metrics. But it works out to about, each one of our clients on average has received about $34,000 in federal grant funding of varying stripes, again, for each month in residence across the 27 clients that we've served, including the losers. So, it's a unique program. It's very, very productive in terms of averages and metrics. We stand on par with some of the more well-known incubator and accelerator programs like Techstars or Y Combinator. But we're a closely held secret up here in upstate New York, where people should come for their life science technologies.
Terrific. Hey, Lou, thank you. While talking about technology incubation and acceleration, I'd like to turn to Jim Sinal. Jim, you operate a program in Rochester, really, I think, a standout across upstate New York as a technological accelerator and incubator located in downtown Rochester. Tell us, if you will, about the program and what's available.
Sure. Thanks, Wynn, for having me today. So NextCore is a nonprofit. It's a venture development organization. We operate a number of different programs to help innovative tech companies launch and grow. And those programs include a 40,000 square foot incubator facility in downtown Rochester. We've got about 62 tech startups in that program today. But we also have 4 different accelerator programs. And as I think, as everyone knows, kind of the accelerator model is the cohort-based model, typically with investment and funding, often on an annual basis. Our largest is the Luminate program, state-funded, where we're investing $3 million a year into 10 companies that we select from all over the world. And we bring them into upstate New York, and we try to connect them with all the resources that you see today on the screen and in the program. But we also have 2 accelerators in climate tech. We have 1 in software. And we also operate a program for supporting manufacturing companies, whether they be small or established. So across the board, it's all about how do we get companies launched? How do we get companies to grow? On the life sciences front, the incubator facility that we have in downtown Rochester does have wet labs. So we've got about 6 wet labs, including shared equipment. And as a broad technology-focused organization, even across these different programs, we don't have a specific focus on life sciences, but we get a lot of bio and medical related companies across the spectrum. So for example, in the Illuminate program, which is focused on optics, imaging, and photonics, we have a lot in eye care. We've got a lot in monitoring healthcare, glucose monitoring devices, a lot of device related things that are in the medical space. As well as in the incubator program. And so as you can see from places like the University of Rochester, even RIT, or elsewhere in the Rochester and Finger Lakes region, there's a lot of life science and medical related technologies being developed. And oftentimes many of those find their way to us into one of the different programs that we operate. And I think, in fact, several of the companies you've got featured in the conference, Healthcare Originals, VPG Medical, Grid Health, and possibly some others, we've had the pleasure of working with over the last few years.
Terrific. Thanks, Jim. Mary, let's turn to you as we kind of turn our focus to the private industry side of today's panel. You at IUVO really serve a critical function for many companies in the life sciences. Tell us, if you will, about IUVO and your work.
Sure, thank you. Yes, so I'm Mary Richardson, and I'm Chief Scientific Officer at IUVO. So IUVO has been around since about 7 years, but it's been a company for decades before. And it kind of grew up around sterilization and the support service, but it's expanded way far beyond that. And basically what we do is we do a lot of testing, and we do a lot of consulting that supports, our partners that we work with, as a contract research organization, to bring their medical devices and their pharmaceuticals, to the market, and to support them, post-marketing in terms of, ongoing support of marketed products in terms of testing. So we do a lot of different types of testing. We do toxicology, we do microbiology, we do chemistry. We do a lot of things related for medical devices, related to biocompatibility, from both chemistry as well as psychology, again, to really do the tests required to bring it to market. On the pharmaceutical side, we do a lot of testing to help people, kind of really characterize and understand their drug in terms of the profile, again, from a preclinical standpoint. And we brought on consulting services where we have experts that can advise in terms of how you build a program, what's your strategy, help oversee testing, as well as, work in terms of working with, the various health authorities in terms of correspondence with them, sitting in meetings, serving as team members. So we focus a lot on the preclinical side, but we do have an arm of our business which is clinically focused in the ophthalmic space. Again, where we can take everything from research all the way, through the development process, both preclinically and clinically. So we're really here to partner with other companies in terms of, helping facilitate their. We work with companies that are very small. It may be only 1 or 2 people where they have an asset, and they need to fill in some of those gaps in terms of of understanding, what the regulations are and the guidance, and to larger companies that just need that support. We work, within the area. We partner with many different companies, both pharmaceutical and medical device, in terms of supporting their needs. But also, we partner in terms of getting the full.
Terrific. And kind of from the small to large, let me turn to you, Joe Chaperi, at Quidel Ortho. Again, we were chatting a little before we came on that I'm struggling because I still want to call you Ortho Clinical Diagnostics. So help me out and perhaps the rest of our audience. What was Ortho Clinical? What is Quidel, and where are you folks today?
Yeah. Thank you, Win. So maybe so a little bit of background. So Quidel purchased Ortho right about the end of May, right before Memorial Day weekend. The acquisition concluded. But I'll go back a little bit further in history. So Ortho Clinical Diagnostics has been in the blood testing industry for over 80 years. And part of the group was a division of Eastman Kodak, which was later procured by Johnson & Johnson, and that's how we became Ortho Clinical Diagnostics. So we have a long history in the Rochester area. Most recently, again, we were purchased by Quidel. And so what that created was Quidel operated mostly in the point of care testing space or over-the-counter tests. So, recently with the COVID pandemic, they had home test kits that you could buy at your local CVS or Walgreens. The ortho side of the business tends to operate more in hospitals, large laboratories, blood centers. So now what we offer is a continuum of testing everywhere from over-the-counter to essentially large blood testing centers. We test over 70% of the U.S. blood supply to ensure it's safe for use. So really a whole continuum of testing. We operate in 130 countries around the world. Our largest R&D center is here in Rochester. And now with the acquisition, probably our second largest R&D center is in San Diego. So we operate on both coasts. We have manufacturing operations in Rochester, San Diego, New Jersey, as well as in Europe. So really a global company, but with a really large, significant presence in Rochester.
So I'm wondering if I could, let me throw this question out, and then I'll start with our academic partners, Lou, Steve, Ryan. Feel free to jump in. One of the clear messages that we hear from our academic partners, and certainly what we see as we look at technological development and commercialization, is a huge push for partnering and collaborations at the university level, and commercialization efforts coming out of certainly the three institutions represented here today are particular standouts. The commercial products that have come out of RIT, out of the University of Rochester and Cornell, have really been transformative in many ways to our life sciences and healthcare industry. At the same time, I think there remains a perception perhaps out there that academic institutions are difficult to collaborate with, or that partnerships are challenging. I'm wondering if the three of you could comment on perhaps efforts at your institutions to break down some of those barriers or opportunities. I'll let any of you start. How's that?
Maybe I'll just make an observation, right? I think Mary, like when IUVO this was a few years back, but if I remember, Diane Morman, one of the people on our staff, served as your staff vet. So there are things we do to try and be, I think, very proactive and supportive of local businesses, and to be more flexible than you might imagine. So in that instance, for example, we really went a little bit out of our way to try to be helpful because of the value of the partnership. I think it's also maybe worth noting that, with Quidel, for example, we do and want to do a lot more internship programs, giving our students and postdocs an understanding of what industry is like. But it goes both ways. I actually have a student from my own lab who is at Quidel now, right? So she joined about a year ago, and that was really nice. And we were over there visiting, myself and several others, to really think about what a partnership would look like. And again, the world we live in is a surprisingly interconnected world. So the head of innovation for Ortho Clinical Diagnostic is somebody who was a postdoc at the U of R about 15, 20 years ago. So I know him from way back, Palani. And so again, those connections are throughout this conversation, and that ability that, because it's a smallish ecosystem, we really do know each other and can support each other in ways that I think sometimes are more flexible than people realize.
Yeah, I'll jump on that too from Stephen. RIT, we operate one of the oldest and largest co-op programs in the country, right? Something like 5,000 co-op placements, and as Jim will tell you, or anybody who runs an incubator, they know how valuable these co-ops are, especially to the startups, but also all of the big partners. So even to this day, when we look at our research portfolio, we have an abnormally large percentage of corporate research. It's just the history of the institution, but it's these things that Stephen talks to. We have these close working relationships with the companies in our region, and so it's a lot different. Yeah, we hear all of the problems that companies and universities have, haggling over IP and stuff like that, but we've always prided ourselves around here as being much different, that we are easy to work with, and these are our neighbors and our partners in technological development. So I'd like to think that that's one of our not so hidden secrets around our region.
Lou, how about at Cornell? I
Yes.
think for many, Cornell might be a bit daunting. It's a huge institution with tentacles around the globe. Talk to me about connecting with Cornell.
Well, I think there's been a sea change over the course of the last decade, and may be best illustrated by an anecdote. Shortly after I joined the university back in 2011, the university had a visit from an entourage from a major multinational life science company, whose president and CEO happened to be a Cornell graduate. In Khrushchev style, he pounded the table at the conference at that meeting, saying, I do business routinely with X institution, Y institution, a variety of peer institutions to Cornell. How come I can't do business with Cornell? And that was a point at which I realized that, as I said, I was new in my tenure at Cornell at the time, that it was an issue with respect to the institution's friendliness to companies, an issue which would have an effect with respect to my own practice area of incubating baby life science companies. And over time, since that decade ago episode, I've been able in my own practice to sort of be the tail that wags the dog, in that a lot of the policies and procedures that had to be forged for Cornell to be actively engaged as a partner in development of life science enterprises, young life science enterprises, ended up being institutionalized as policies and procedures by the institution writ large with respect to larger corporate partners. And now it's evolved to the point where there's a stratified approach for intellectual property, whereas before it had been an inflexible no. There's a stratified approach for partnership with various corporations, depending on the level of support. And it's a much more nuanced approach. And most recently, captained by establishment of a particular corporate partnership office at the vice provost's level. So an associate vice provost charged with corporate partnerships. And in part, we work with them, and the Praxis Incubator, our peer physical sciences incubator, work closely with Mr. Govang, who's heading that office for the moment. And as I said, over the last decade, it's been a sea change in the institution's friendliness towards business partnerships and overtures.
Hey,
And while
Win,
we're talking about friendly,
can I-
I'm sorry, Ryan, go ahead.
yeah, I wanted to mention one other thing. Back to your original question, you talked about uh, both partnerships and technology translation. And you really hit the nail on the head, because right now we're living in the era of the sort of the big bets, especially as it comes to federal support for research and economic development, right? So, we mentioned the Engines program and the Build Back Better and USICA and all of these other things, where it is required that you build these multi-institutional partnerships that have academia and not-for-profits and for-profits all partnering on these large proposals for these national centers. And that's the game we're playing. And I like where we're positioned here in our region to go after those. And I think that's why we're seeing some early success. It also reminds me of the Translational Science Center, one of the first translational science centers that the NIH funded in the entire country, was funded at URMC. They were the lead, and we supported that. And once again, they're for a lot of technology research and development, but that economic development and that translational piece of it, and including the incubators and the accelerators and all that, it's not just a nice to have these days, it's essential.
So you've raised a really important point, and maybe Jim, I can get you to comment on this too. Let's talk a little bit about the focus on economic development and the opportunities that provides. So, and I will say this as a lifelong upstate New Yorker, although not from the Rochester or Finger Lakes region myself, we would look at Rochester, during my youth and say, okay, Rochester is bulletproof, right? They've got Eastman Kodak. We will always need film. We will always need cameras. Rochester's bulletproof. They've got Xerox. We will always need copies. And Rochester's bulletproof because they've got Bausch and Lomb. We will always need ground glass lenses. Well, as it turns out, the digital revolution hit us, and it turns out that we didn't need film and glass lenses and copies, certainly in the way that we thought we did. And I'm often struck, and I will say to folks who haven't visited your facility, if you find yourself in Rochester, by all means, you need to stop into the next core facility. By the way, speaking of transitions, located in a former flagship store for a department store chain that's been really transformed into a gee whiz facility. But I'm wondering, Jim, if you can talk a little bit about, from your perspective, the transition in the local economy and what that's meant for the Finger Lakes generally, but perhaps more importantly from an economic development standpoint.
Sure, I can attempt to try to unpack some of that. There's a lot of case studies that have been written about those companies that were once large here, and it's a similar story, right, with very mature companies all over the country, really. But from an economic development standpoint, I used to quote in every meeting I could when I first came on board at NextCore over a decade ago, to try to convey to the rest of the community the importance of innovation and entrepreneurship in general, which includes life sciences and includes lots of other things. But I used to always quote the Kauffman Foundation, which again, a long time ago, put out a lot of reports that showed that nearly all the net new job growth in America comes from companies that are less than 5 years old. So new companies create almost all the net new jobs in the nation. Older companies grow, but older companies also decline. They sort of net out. The engine of job growth is the formation and growth of new businesses. And so that was sort of one of the things we tried to really get across, convey to the community, even as we were deciding to build a new facility that was in downtown Rochester. There wasn't a central gathering place for entrepreneurship in the Rochester region. We felt that was something that was needed. There were also studies from Brookings Institute and others about the rise of innovation districts. We sort of had an embryonic one forming, but all these things kind of converged to say the region needs to put a lot more focus on entrepreneurship, on innovation, on translating things out of universities, but also the community at large, because what we found was that through some of these big companies, there were a lot of people with expertise in a market and knew where there were problems. They knew how to solve them, and they could create startup companies as well. So it's not always about technology out of institutions and universities. Those are clearly important, but there's also, you know, 1 million people in the Finger Lakes region who have a lot of experience that could create companies. So it's kind of a combination of all those factors. You do have to continue to innovate. I won't sort of go into all the stories about big companies that, you know, held off on transitioning because, you know, you don't want to kill the cash cow and cut your own margins by introducing something that has thin margins. And that's a very tricky thing to do, but you have to keep innovating. And, you know, we're firm believers that innovation and startups, we have to keep that engine growing. One stat I will also just mention is even in the heyday of those big companies, even when Eastman Kodak had 60,000+ employees, the early 80s compared to today, even with the decline of all of those, there's more people employed in the Rochester Finger Lakes region than back then. So all of those people have been absorbed into small and medium-sized businesses, which is a much more resilient economy to have, and that's a good thing.
I think
maybe
you raise a
Win,
point. Yes.
I wanted to
Sorry.
maybe just bring Mary into the conversation, because I think Mary's very exemplary of that kind of transition. So used to work at B&L and maybe speak to your own experience founding IUVO, Mary.
Yeah, thank you. As I was just thinking about it, you know, when I was at Bausch and Lomb, you know, which was a big company, and then they went through a lot of changes and you know, changing their whole kind of focus for a while there. You know, I had no idea what was going on in the industry. So then when I joined IUVO, and we started, you know, connecting with people, I was, you know, really amazed in terms of how much, you know, how many little companies and mid-sized companies were here, how much technology, how many smart people that were there, and people that we could collaborate with. And for us at IUVO, the number of companies that we're now collaborating within this region just continues to grow and grow. And really, you know, some really exciting innovation is coming out. So I've really seen it. I think I was a little bit naive to it when I was at Bausch and Lomb, just because I was a big company person. And so it's been really fun because you get to do a lot of different things and wear a lot of different hats. So I definitely have seen that change, and it really over the last 7 years has really taken off.
So Mary, let me put you on the spot a little bit. How's that? You know, I can imagine that we may have some audience members out there who are, you know, looking at their own career trajectory. Maybe they're with a large company,
Yeah.
and thinking about making a move. Listen, IUVO Biosciences has been a tremendous success, and at the same time, I don't want to underestimate the potential risks that you probably were looking at when you decided to leave a place like Bausch and Lomb to join an innovator and a startup. Help me understand, what is it that convinced you to make that move, and is there something that you found helpful as you made that transition?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, so I really enjoyed Bausch and Lomb. And it was a great tenure there, and I was comfortable. I could have stayed there, but then I saw the opportunity with IUVO to really start something new and special, and saw the opportunities in terms of, it had been kind of stagnant moving along, and that we could really, kind of really start turning things around. And through a lot of that is through these connections. I think we've essentially doubled the business in the last 7 years and brought on a lot of new capabilities. So just kind of, kind of having that vision of what it could be. And then when you go from a larger company, sometimes the pluses are the same as the minuses. You get to do a lot of different things. You can put your hands in places which you might not be able to if you're at a larger company, and just really learn. So I'm a scientist by training, but now I know a lot more about business. I know a lot more about different things, different parts of science, connecting it, the whole process, and not just my field. So, it's been a lot of personal growth. But for anyone joining, company small, there is a lot of opportunities, and you can make so much out of it, and really do a lot of, kind of innovative things that you may not be able to do if you're kind of one piece and you're kind of in one role in a larger company, which is often, how they're set up just doesn't make sense.
And as we're talking about transitioning and innovation and moving, and the life cycle of a company, Joe, I'm thinking about you, and talk about a company that has a long history with some legacy corporations, that has also really demonstrated a unique ability to transition, to change, to pivot. Help me understand, what is it? What's in the water over at Quidel Ortho that allowed you guys to take some of those risks to move into new areas?
Yeah, I think our when we transitioned, we were divested from Johnson and Johnson, and frankly, Johnson and Johnson is an absolutely phenomenal company. But it was one of many divisions within a very large company, right? And we were owned by private equity for a period, and that created a really exciting time, because now we were in a sense standing alone. And I think that, Mary, much like what you said, all of a sudden you found yourself, even though we're a pretty good sized company, but you found yourself wearing a lot of hats, because you had to solve the problem at hand in whatever way you could. For us, it's always been, we're extremely customer focused, right? We act as one company when it comes to our customers. So if a customer is experiencing an issue, it doesn't matter if I'm in R&D and somebody else is in operations. If we've got to solve the problem together, we're going to solve the problem together to make life better for our customers. So I think that enables us being very close to our customers, understanding what they need, what the situations they're dealing with, their problems. That allows us to be very innovative, because we're seeing their challenges, and then we're trying to develop products and solutions to solve those. And being standalone and kind of maybe a medium-sized company, that enabled us to start to be very, very innovative. When, as you know, we've kind of told the story, when COVID first hit, we said, gosh, one of our core competencies is infectious disease testing. That's something we're extremely good at. We should do something about this. And within 19 days, we had our first COVID test developed and ready for manufacturing. So it's that focus on what are the problems out there, how do we help solve those problems for our customers or for society, and then marshaling the team together. And being a kind of a medium-sized company, you're able to do that.
And I'm glad you brought up COVID and the impact that had, in this case, in a positive way for your industry. Stephen, I'm thinking of the University of Rochester, because of course you, in addition to being a world-class university, are a world-class academic medical center, and are providing patient care and doing research on a daily basis on medical patients. Talk a little bit, if you can, about the challenges of juggling those various roles, and where does the medical center play in the larger research and technology development space for the University of Rochester?
Well, maybe one narrow answer to the question is sort of in the COVID vaccine trials, right? We have a couple of groups that are very much involved with those trials. So, for example, the early phase of what was ultimately the Pfizer vaccine, that was the principal investigator of the North American trials was a faculty member at U of R. And it was actually done jointly with Rochester Regional, which is another interesting partnership in that case. So in that case, actually, both health systems were involved in that early trial. But really, all of the vaccine candidates that are licensed now went through early phase trials at U of R, because we have a couple of these vaccine centers in which that's really what they do. And that's also true for the monoclonal antibodies and for the other therapeutic technologies that have been developed. So really integral to the assessment of those. And that goes a lot into community relations, and that starts to pivot over into clinical care. So if you want to engage diverse populations and really be inclusive about how you do clinical research, you have to do a lot of outreach and a lot of trust building with communities. And actually the same is true if you want to successfully protect people and really increase vaccine uptake. You've got to build the same relationships, the same trust in the clinical system to get out into communities of color, into rural communities, into other communities where vaccination rates can be low unless you do something actively to engage the community and build trust. So there's a strong synergy actually between the research enterprise and the clinical enterprise. Same is true in cancer, for example. Many cancer patients want to participate at the very high rate of engagement in clinical trial. And so the more trials you have available, and this goes back to industry relationships, right? If you don't have the partnerships that bring in trials to the institution, that's what patients are often looking for. They want that engagement, the families want that engagement, and that has benefits, as it turns out, for the clinical mission as well. And it brings in stronger faculty investigators because they want to be part of cutting edge development of new treatments for disease. They want to be engaged with things that really move the needle on public good. And so there's a strong synergy in really almost every respect.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned that as well, because I think it's worth mentioning that the University of Rochester Medical Center has really been a leader in finding ways to expand clinical trials to reach underserved and marginalized communities. And I think as the industry as a whole has begun to recognize the limitations of not being able to reach diverse populations, that it's critically important that institutions, academic medical centers, hospital services be able to find ways to expand their clinical research to reach some of those communities. So I think URMC, particularly, and University of Rochester generally deserves an awful lot of credit for the work that you folks have been doing there. And while we're talking, I suppose, about kind of bringing to bear a larger perspective, Lou, I of course think of Cornell as an upstate New York, as a Finger Lakes institution, but of course you're so much larger than that, and I think many people listening today may be aware of the recent expansion of a new campus in Roosevelt Island down in the city and some other places. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the ability of a place like Cornell to bring the world to the Finger Lakes and how that may open up opportunities for folks interested in working in the life sciences and in healthcare.
Well, life sciences generally is a pretty big area. The university has a global, world level reputation. I think in 2021 we were rated 14th in the world for life sciences. And aside from just the multiple campuses, the medical college is located in New York City. The tech campus, newly established on Roosevelt Island, is also an arm of the medical college in Qatar. But the reputation of the university is such that, and increasingly the center is such that we draw from applicants from around the world. Currently, we have one applicant from the Ukraine that's in process. The most recent client to join the center was a company established initially in Paris, France, that came to upstate New York primarily for collaboration with Cornell's College of Agriculture and Life Sciences and genomic capabilities that are close at hand here at the center's Weill Hall facility. So, we have the capability to draw from around the United States as well as the world. And one of the other panelists mentioned the Clinical Translational Science Center at University of Rochester. These types of science centers and the proximity to these types of resources offer the promise of early pilot clinical work, human clinical work under investigator-initiated IDEs or INDs, and these are huge in the development of young biomedical companies, in that they demonstrate, often at affordable rates, if you will, or sometimes primarily for academic publication purposes. They offer proof of principle that's affordable in humans, first in man experience, that is otherwise well out of the reach of many small biomedical companies. So U of R's CTSC, Cornell maintains a CTSC down in New York City at its medical college campus. The proximity for these human clinical facilities is a huge draw for young companies, as well as mature companies operating in the human health space. And then Cornell also offers the added benefit of the College of Veterinary Medicine, New York State College of Veterinary Medicine, which is considered the preeminent vet college in the world, and their capabilities of doing GLP quality research for preclinical research or animal experimentation, supportive of new drugs and new devices, dovetails very, very nicely with the clinical capabilities that are available both at Rochester as well as Upstate Medical College, SUNY being Buffalo, and Cornell's own Medical College downstate, in order to be a very efficient engine in moving technologies forward. So again, upstate New York and New York State is the place to be.
And while we're talking about kind of business challenges, and Ryan, I want to turn to you. Without doubt, the single biggest challenge that our members at MedTech are telling us that they're facing really deal with workforce challenges. And certainly, I think I'd have broad agreement among this group that in order to be an attractive place to start a business, to expand a business, to grow a business, we need to have access to a high quality workforce. And in our first hour, we spent some time talking about the highly educated, highly motivated workforce available across the Finger Lakes. And at the same time, as you mentioned, I think briefly earlier, RIT has really been a pioneer in placing students through internships, through other programs in companies. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that process and how you folks have integrated kind of work experiences as a necessary component of the educational process.
Yeah, it's a great question. When, as we talked about these, the era of the big bets and all these national centers and whatnot, yeah, economic development is a huge portion of these new research and technology development centers nationally. But parallel to that, and just as big, is the workforce development component of whatever those national centers are going to provide. And good news, bad news when it comes to New York State. I mean, the good news is we have a plethora of some of the finest higher education universities in the world. Full stop. We produce the second most PhDs, our third most, next to Texas and California. But the bad news is New York, for quite a while, has been a great exporter of talent to the rest of the country. So, when you talk about Silicon Valley and, Washington and Texas and all these other booming areas of technology, they're getting a pretty steady stream of the graduates from Cornell and RIT and U of R and Columbia, and the list goes on. So a part of our goal, of course, is to keep more of that brain power here locally and working locally. And we do see that, as Jim pointed out. You know, there are more net jobs now in Rochester than during the heyday of Kodak, Xerox, Bausch and Lomb, Corning. It's because of all of these small and medium-sized startup companies where the jobs are being created. So that's the good news for us. The good news for us is, yes, we're still a very white-collar manufacturing city. With, if you look at patents per capita and all these sort of things, we still rank at the very top. And you saw the Harvard study for the next great, technology hub, in Rochester was #1 in the nation. So yeah, we do have all those wonderful things going for us. And I do think we have stemmed the tide to the great migration of the graduates from our institution, that they can actually remain here. It's very important to keep in mind that, that the region and Rochester in particular has to be a place where people want to work, play, and live. That's what's required. I think we have all the elements. Sometimes we just need to tell a better story. But yeah, workforce development, huge in whatever we do with regards to any of these large national efforts.
Yeah, I'll add to that just briefly. We define our graduates from our program as fully invested companies. And over the course of the last 10 years of the operation, it's been a change, a sea change, a gradual change, though, maybe a tidal movement from the baseline, which was investment would come into a company, and concomitant with that investment was a mandate saying, you want this money, you're moving to Palo Alto. Or if you want this money, you're moving to Cambridge. And there was a lot of grumbling at the time, but they marched where the money demanded them to go. Increasingly, we've been successful in retaining our graduates, either in whole or in part, because we've been able to successfully convince investors, even though those investors may be from far afield in Palo Alto or Cambridge or what have you. We've been able to successfully argue to those investors that the success of the company in which they invested, based on that success, was contingent upon the environment here in upstate New York, upon the environment here in Ithaca and the Finger Lakes. And you remove the company from that supportive and nurturing environment, you're removing one of the value adds that has contributed to the basis of their investment. So increasingly, we are successful in making that case.
And
Well, listen,
I would add that
my academic
that
colleagues
Luminate
would,
is a great. Sorry, Ryan.
yeah, no, I'm sorry, Steve. I was going to say, I'm sure you and Joe, like I have seen a lot of boomerangs lately, which is a really positive sign.
Yep.
I was just going to add that Luminate's a very good example of what you were just speaking about. That it's the largest global incubator of photonics and imaging companies. It brings companies from international locations to Rochester. You can only come to get the money to relocate in Rochester, and it also creates an attractor for our graduates, right? People who graduate from all of the universities in the region want to work for those startup companies because it's exciting. And so that's part of this ecosystem of retaining talent, and that's inside Jim's shop. So that's a nice example of collaboration and success in bringing companies internationally here.
Maybe a quick comment too. Now that as being part of Quidel Ortho, and we have an R&D group, a large R&D group in San Diego, which is a hotbed of the life sciences, right? So in some ways, it's easy to attract talent. It's incredibly difficult to retain talent because there are so many companies. People can bounce around quite easily. And we've actually had a lot of conversations about continuing to expand in Rochester. And once you get people here, this is a tremendous place. Finger Lakes, Rochester, tremendous place to raise a family, lots of recreation opportunities, sport, entertainment, but you got to get the people here first. So by this combination of startups, small companies, medium-sized companies, there's a lot of opportunity. And as we recruit people in, I think they stay, because once they get here, they realize what a great place it is.
Well, I think, listen, on that hopeful note, and I think that important note, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up this conversation. This has been a great hour. Ryan Raffaele at RIT, Stephen Dewhurst at University of Rochester, Lou Walser at Cornell University, Jim Sinal at NextCore, Mary Richardson at Iuvo Biosciences, and Joe Chaperi at Quidel Ortho. Thank you very much to each of you. This has been a great conversation. Let's keep the conversation going. So thanks very much. For those of you who are staying with us, in our next hour, we've got a series of terrific interviews with innovators. So you're not going to want to miss that. But thanks very much. Talk to you later.